Queen Esther was the heroine in the story of Purim, but she was really lost to the Jewish people. Where do we see a foreshadowing of the fact that she would be lost? Again, she was the grandmother of Darius, the king of Persia, who was not really Jewish. My father pointed out that the statement of Esther, kaasher, avadti, avadti, as I'm lost, was sort of a too negative a connotation, and it led to her eventual being lost to the Jewish people. That is a novel interpretation, because most of the time you look at that and that's read in a positive light. If I'm lost, meaning I'm giving myself up for the Jewish people. Or it could be argued that maybe Mordechai's statement, a few psukim later, where he said, if you're going to be silent, we're going to get revach v'hatzalah from another place. V'atu beit avich tovedu, you and your family are going to be lost. It could very well be that he was foreshadowing Esther's eventual loss to the Jewish people. And do I have any sources to back me up? If you look at these statements side by side, one is al tiftach peh Satan, the concept of kaasher avadti by Esther, but there's another concept called shgaga lifnei hashalit, which is what Mordechai was saying, atu beit avich tovedu. He was innocently saying something, but eventually it actually took place. Besides those two concepts of al tiftach peh Satan and shgaga lifnei hashalit, there is another concept of killas chacham, which is seen by the fact that the Parshas Tetzaveh is always read between, right next to Purim. Parshas Tetzaveh is the Parsha where Moshe is not mentioned at all in the Parsha, because that is simply because when he was pleading on behalf of Bnei Israel, earlier on by the Chet HaEgel, he said, if you don't forgive them, mecheni na misifrecha asher katafti, you should erase me from the record which you have written. I saw written by Rav Moshe Bogomilsky in the name of Mishkanotecha Yisrael that the word asher has the same gematria as Tetzaveh. It's a hint that the whole Parshas Tetzaveh will come, and there will be no mention of Moshe Rabbeinu, because he said this line, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, then erase me from the Sefer. That is the time where he was erased from the Sefer, during Parshas Tetzaveh. Regardless, the idea is that why is it that Moshe was erased from Parashat Tetzaveh? Because when a chacham gives some sort of curse, even if it was innocent, it actually is somehow fulfilled. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Mecheni na misifrecha," even though the Jews were forgiven, Hashem still completed that curse because he was a chacham. And this is based on the Gemara here in Brachos 56a. Ksuvos Chav Gimel Amud Aleph tells this following story. There was a group of girls that were held captives, and they came to Nehardai. The father of Shmuel said, okay, I'm going to watch them. And the son said, why bother? They were already, you probably violated until they got here. What's the point? Shmuel's father says to Shmuel, if it was your daughter, you wouldn't speak like that. And then the Gemara goes on and it quotes a pasuk in Koheles that says, Kishgaga sheyotza milifnei hashalit, like a mistake that came out of a ruler's mouth. And Shmuel, it wasn't long until Shmuel's daughters ended up being in captivity themselves. The point is that much like Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mecheni na misifrecha, or much like potentially what Mordechai said, Atu beit avich tovedu, innocent statements, not meant literally, but they're taken as fact, kishgaga sheyotzim elifnei hashalit, and it led to Shmuel's problem here as well. Here is the pasuk in Koheles, Yesh Rav Raisi Tachas Hashemes, kishgaga sheyotza lifnei hashalit. Rashi says that it's like a ruler who says something, davar shagaga mipiv shogeg, by accident, the Efshar Lachsor, that is a source. Similar Gemara, Pinchas, the brother of Shmuel, lost somebody in his family, was mourning and was doing something with his fingernails, not exactly sure, and Shmuel criticized him or said, why are you doing this? And then Pinchas said, well, if you were in the same predicament as me, you would do the same. And sure enough, Shmuel ended up losing somebody in his family. Sure enough, they quote the same pasuk, bad thing happened to Shmuel. Shmuel ends up having somebody die in his family as well. And then Pinchas came to visit him, and Shmuel screamed at him, threw his nails at him too. And he said, Leis lecha bris krusa l'sfasayim. You don't know that when you say something, it basically has to happen? Gemara goes on and says, how do we know that a bris krusa l'sfasayim? Because it says, by Avram, he said to his lads, stay here, imachamor v'ani v'anar nelcha ad kov v'nishtachem v'nevashuva elechem. We're going to return. Even though he thought he wasn't going to return, he said we're going to return. V'istaya milsa dahadar travayu. And it so happened that they both returned. He didn't really think that they were going to return, but he said they were going to return, so we know this concept of bris krusa l'sfasayim. Tosfos brings a very interesting open-ended question. He said the whole story with Pinchas and Shmuel and the fingernails, and Pinchas saying, oh yeah, if it happened to you, what would you do? He said that's an example of al tiftach pel satan. How come it doesn't bring over what Ula said, al tiftach pel satan, like it does in Brachos 19a? Why not? And really, it's an open-ended question by Tosfos, but the Maharsha has an answer. The Maharsha explains that al yiftach pel satan is different than that concept of shkaga mipiva shalit, because it talks about ayri kisha omer klalis atzmo ba'oso puranus v'ra'a. It's when somebody's talking about himself and it's bad. When they say something bad, but it's about themselves, even if it wasn't intended, as opposed to those other cases where somebody was talking about somebody else, like Shmuel and Pinchas. What comes out of this is that there's definitely three types of lashonos when it comes to this concept. One is Kilalas chacham afilu bechinam hi ba'a. Number two is shegaga sheyotze milifnei ashalit. And number three is bris krusa l'sfasayim. Those are the three manifestations of saying something if someone is a tzaddik, and it actually can be upheld even if you did not mean to say it. And those three concepts, shgaga sheyotze milifnei ashalit, bris krusa l'sfasayim, kilas chanim lo bechinam hiba'a, those are in contradistinction to al yiftach pel satan, which is a concept that is when somebody talks about themselves and there's something bad in the way they talked about themselves. Now we could understand possibly two reasons why Esther was left without a nation. One, it could be like Mordechai said, at uvei savich tovedu, you and your family is going to be lost. That could be like shkaga sheyotze min lifnei hashalit, like the Gemaras in Ksuvos 23 and Moed Katan 18. Or it could be that she was al tiftach pel satan. She said kaasher avadti, and that's the concept also of kilalas chacham lo bechinam hiba'a. Either way, there is a supernatural reason potentially also why Esther was left without a nation despite being the heroine. I think an overall takeaway message is that you should just watch out what you say to other people, how you say it, but also how you say things about yourself.